Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geoffrey Bowden. I'm the General Secretary of the EUATC, one of the partners in the annual ELIS survey. And we have with us two other partners from Fit Europe and from EMT. We have John O'Shea and Alexander Krause, but also we're very honored to have with us Christos Elenides, a commissioner at the European Commission, and also you may see a familiar face, Rudy Thierry, who is the man pulling the strings of this ELIS annual survey. So I'm going to turn off my camera, and I will ask my colleagues to shut off their cameras as well, because we want to hear from Christos now, who is going to say a few words about what's going on in the world, and certainly as it affects the language industry.
Thank you very much, Geoffrey. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the European Commission and DGT, I would like to welcome you all to the presentation of the 10th European Language Industry Survey, acronym ELIS 2022. It is the first time we have this event within the context of our Translating Europe workshops. We do this to emphasize the nature of this effort as a pan-European collaborative activity organized and run by colleagues coming from the European Union of National Associations of Translation Companies, EUATC, the EMT University Network, ELIA, Fit Europe, GALA, Women in Localization, and the Linked X group of the Commission that we have put together. The ELIS survey was a real success this year, with over 1,300 responses from all corners of the industry and from all parts of Europe, including freelance translators, language service companies, translation departments from public administrations, training institutes, and translation students. I am glad that I have this opportunity to address you today, even if it is only virtual, to discuss the state of play of the industry and the developments in the translation profession, objectively and not subjectively, based on evidence and data coming out of the survey. The effort to conduct and subsequently analyze and present the results of the survey is a fine example of working together by building bridges within the language industry and beyond, bridges that we so much need in Europe right now. Today, perhaps more than ever in recent history, we need to respond to a crisis with exceptional swiftness and immediate impact. Yet, in all this, we must choose our words very carefully. And we must choose them not only in the languages we nurture as European Union, but more, whether it is Ukrainian or Russian. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a war going on in Europe as we speak, a war that presents to us a new reality, a reality that shows to us that the only way forward is to stand together and in solidarity with the people and the government of Ukraine, in defense of our democratic values, the security and freedom of a united Europe. As we speak, the Ukrainian people continue to fight bravely for their country, to uphold the values that we have solidified in this European Union of ours. I am proud that all of us, as individuals and as Europeans, but also at statesmanship level, in all member states of the European Union, demonstrate our strong support to Ukraine in practical terms, through financial aid, humanitarian assistance, linguistic support, and so on, without using brutal, negligent, and inhumane violence. But at the same time, let us be clear, Russia should not underestimate the resolve and strength of our democracies. We will not allow them to replace the rule of law by the rule of force and ruthlessness. In DGT, we contributed in our own way by providing translations into Ukrainian and Russian for the President of the Commission, our spokesperson services, and other colleagues on a 24/7 basis the last few weeks. And we are continuing to do so. We have deployed a multilingual website, including the Ukrainian language, for those fleeing the war in Ukraine and coming to the European Union, and for those that want to help these refugees. Last week, we also released a first version of our Ukrainian translation engine that you can also access. Of course, we are continuing to enrich the linguistic data and metadata for this engine, but it is out there, and that is the least we could do. At this point, I would like to thank the organizers of the event really and sincerely for introducing in the program a section to talk about how we can all help during this crisis. The results of the survey show that in 2021, the European language industry seems to have experienced growth, a development which is reflected in revenues, recruitment plans, and investment trends. We also know from our experiences in the past that sudden upheavals like the one we're facing now in Europe can quickly change things. Let us continue working together to address the problems that our community faces in a proactive and engaging manner. What also comes out of the survey is that the growth seems to have benefited all types of language services and specializations, not only the big stakeholders. I think we can all agree that these are positive signs and an indication towards a market that will enable all operators, small and big, to thrive and develop. At the same time, there are also some trends that are less positive. For instance, the survey results show that more than 1/3 of independent language professionals need to top up their income with another professional activity. Another challenge identified is the lack of work-life balance, which possibly deteriorated by the unpredictable work patterns and volumes, let alone the pandemic, which is still with us. These are examples of concerns and challenges that we need to talk about in an open and transparent way. We need to identify concrete actions to tackle these challenges, actions that must be endorsed and sponsored by all sectors in the industry. We need to think about the future, pave the way forward in a realistic, practical way, applying business sense throughout the process. One important issue pointed out by the survey is the need to do better in fostering linguistic talent. It seems that there is a lack of skilled resources, especially when it comes to technological skill sets. Personally, I see a limited investment in the development of profiles, such as computational linguists, for example. And these are the profiles that will take our CAD tools and technologies such as AI and machine translation to the next level. We have here with us today a very good representation from academia through the EMT network, and I am confident that they will contribute to the discussion on how to develop and attract talent to our industry. We need to ensure the continuity and attractiveness of our sector by prospecting effectively the new generation of linguists here and now. The Commission and DGT will continue to declare full support to initiatives such as the ELIS survey. It allows us to work side by side with other language industry partners and to gain insights of the ongoing trends in the industry and the markets. As a sizable actor in the language and translation industry, we also face the same challenges as most of you, be it directly or through our external partners and contractors. Recruitment, upskilling and reskilling of staff, as well as disruptions caused by technology, to name just a few, are issues that remain front and center in our everyday operations. Ladies and gentlemen, the discussions that you will have this afternoon should not stop at the end of this event. They should continue in various strands, constellations, and fora, because translation is a big deal. It makes a big difference, and its significance has become bigger than ever. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a really successful and fruitful virtual event.
Thank you very much indeed, Christos. I'm now going to ask Rudy to turn on his camera, if I may. Thank you very much. I will turn off mine. And now I will attempt, I hope, to share my screen, and you can take us through the presentation before we hand over, and maybe you can hand over the screen to the next speaker after you. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my screen.
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. And thank you, Christos, for that nice introduction. Can you immediately go to the next slide, please, Jeffrey? Okay, thanks. We will start, as you see on the slide here, we will start with the looking at the results of the language industry as a whole, before we go into the segment-specific parts, where also John O'Shea and Alexandra Krause will present their part of the results. But first, I would like to say a few words about the survey itself. Can you go to the next slide, Jeffrey? Thanks. Yeah, this is, as Christos said, this is already the 10th edition of ELIS. We started in 2013 because we wanted to look at opinions and expectations in the industry, not just at market data. And that was because ELIS came out of EUATC, as you know, and now is supported by all these associations. And associations and interest groups have a vested interest in knowing what lives among their membership. So the core of ELIS has always been about the opinions, the fears, the concerns, the expectations of all the stakeholders in the language industry. Over time, the ELIS has adapted, and each year it was a little bit different, and that was also the case here in the 10th edition. As was mentioned, it is now embedded in the Translating Europe initiative. We changed our platform. We moved to the EU survey platform with its multilingual capabilities. So for the first time, we tested out a multilingual version of ELIS, both for the independent language professionals and for the language service companies. Was a little bit of a learning curve initially, but we made it. And we also expanded the scope of the topics. Those of you who have taken the survey, which are a lot of you probably, have seen that you could select a number of specific topics. All these changes are made because the needs of information of the survey partners are changing as well. I would like to give you a few words of caution to start with, because since we are looking at expectations and opinions, these are inherently subjective matters, and we need to turn them into objective data, and that's not always as easy as it sounds. First thing that we need is enough responses, and we are therefore very grateful that we have as many replies as we have this year, because that makes the replies, the results, more representative. Now, the representativity is not only for the whole of Europe, for the whole of the language industry, but it's also important for the individual countries. Can you move to the next slide, please? in the report that is available on the ELIS website, you will see a few tables with listing all the countries. Here you see only a part of them, with the number of replies that we received from these countries. And between in brackets, you always see a number there, which is a number that we use to as a kind of a threshold for representativity. So it means that if your country does not have enough responses in there, that you need to take the results from the country always with a little bit of caution, because obviously if you only have a few replies, that is not that reliable. This year we had participants from 47 countries, and 17 of them reached the threshold for the companies, the language companies, and 19 for the independent professionals. That is a fairly okay result, but we can always do better, of course. This being said, let's look now at the findings for the industry as a whole. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, you can go immediately to the next one. Another word of caution, when you're looking at these graphs here, these all represent percentages. These are not the percentages of increase of decrease, although they seemed that way. These are percentages that represent the number of responses that indicated an increase minus the number of responses that indicate a decrease. So they represent the feeling, the opinion of the participants, not the actual degree of increase or the degree of decrease that they might have, because that is extremely difficult to determine, especially in expectations. Now, the main thing that the main conclusion that we can draw from this slide here is that the expected rebound, and actually it was only the language companies that expected a real rebound back in 2021, but that this rebound really happened, at least for that segment of the industry. You see these graphs; they are clear enough how both the real and the expectations improve from 2020 to 21, from a negative level, both for the language companies and the independent professionals, to a positive one. Now, there is clearly a big difference between the language companies and the independent professionals. Language companies jumped from a -13 last year to a plus 50% this year, which is a huge improvement, obviously. The independent professionals improved as well from -15 to a plus 15. But obviously that improvement is much lower. This is normal. We see that each year that the individual professionals are much more cautious than the companies, seem to be a little bit more bullish in their expectations. But sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, apparently. Now, despite these differences, we do see a very big agreement, and not only between the companies and the individuals, but also the training institutes and language departments regarding the expectations for the global market activity, because what I was mentioning before was about the individual activity level, the individual business level of the companies and the professionals. When we're looking at the market activity, everybody agrees that 2022 is going to be much better than 2021. Now, obviously, the survey closed on the 31st of January. And that was before the Ukraine war broke out. And that is the reason why we are planning to launch some small follow-up surveys to look at how things evolve now, how Q1, the first quarter of the year, was faring, and what people are thinking about the rest of the year. But that is for later. Next slide, please. Thank you. The year and the expectations and the improvement of 2021 was not only about the activity, about the revenue. It was also in terms of performance, in terms of profitability. We saw improvements in recruitment levels. We saw improvements in investment, and we even see an improvement, if you can call it this way, improvement in the price increases. We know that there's a lot of talk always about price pressure in the industry. This is about the first year that I've seen in the survey. I've seen an indication that people are truly expecting a price increase for 2022. And not only the companies and the independent professionals, but also the buyers, the language service buyers and the language departments. There is some discrepancy in the first of all in the size of or the degree of price increase that people are expecting, but there seems also to be a difference between the price increase that buyers have seen in 2021 apparently, while the language companies and the individual professionals did not see that happen really in 2021. But where it comes to the expectations for 2022, everybody seems to agree. Now, as I said, the improvement for 2021 was also in terms of profitability. Last year, we seem to have discovered what we called a Goldilocks zone, or a sweet spot for the language companies, where it seemed that the size segment between 1 million and 5 million euro outperformed all the other size segments. And we're very, very curious to see if we would see the same thing this year. The evidence there is not very clear. That size segment still outperforms most other size segments, but it's not the only one. We do see that the larger or the largest size segments seem to profit more in terms of business volume, possibly not in profitability. But as I said, the picture is not as clear as it was last year. But anyway, everybody is profiting from the new boom or the rebound of the economy. Yes, the next slide, please. Okay, wait, sorry. Just mentioned about the pricing, especially the outsource pricing is important. This evolution and expectation of the increase of outsourcing prices, because obviously the language industry is known to be an outsourcing industry, or at least believed to be an outsourcing industry. Now, this is a concept that is mainly coming from the private translation world, let's say. If we look at the responses coming from the public administrations who have responded to the survey, the picture looks very different. Public administrations tend to outsource less than 50% of their language work, while the private enterprise language departments or buyers outsource typically more than 75%. Outsourcing is indeed the typical model for the language companies, the agencies, although, as you see on the chart on the right here, there is a sizable part of that segment that is not primarily or overwhelmingly outsource oriented. We see even that 7%, maybe it's a minority, sure, but still 7%, is completely focused on in-house production. So they are not outsourcing anything, at least if we can believe the answers to the survey, of course. Yes, next slide, Jeffrey. All those improvements in 2021 obviously also influenced what we call our mood table. And we have been using this table the last 5-6 years, I believe, in ELIS. It is based on the opinions about strong investments and disinvestment intentions. And when I'm saying strong intentions, I'm referring to the intention to buy other companies or open new offices, both in domestic or abroad. Or on the contrary, to a decision to sell the company and to leave the industry, for instance. So it's not just, okay, investing in new hardware or software or hire a new person. These are really critical investment and disinvestment decisions that we're talking about. And we see that over the years, the tendency changes. In 2021, that sentiment was at an all-time low, with you see in the gray at the bottom 0.7 there. This year we're back at the 0.84, which is, let's say, more or less pre-COVID levels. It's we're not there completely, but we're back in calmer waters. Now, when you're looking at this slide, this table, you want to look at your own country, you will see these green, yellow, and gray highlights. Green means that it's really positive. Yellow means that it's positive, but okay, a little bit less. You see the legend there that explains the colors. We don't have any reds, which means that everybody still is more investment oriented rather than disinvestment oriented. The ones in gray do not have enough answers to draw a valid conclusion. So you can look at those results, those scores, but keep in mind that the number of answers is too low to be really confident about them. Yeah, the next slide, please. Which is the last slide on the generic industry. So we've been looking at a little bit more this year at what it means to work in the language industry, and there's much more information. You will see that in the report, but I do want to draw some highlight some of the elements here. For instance, about the work-life balance. We see clearly strong differences sometimes between the various types of organization. We do not see much difference based on the size of the organizations, but there is a difference depending on the segment. So the private enterprises show the best work-life balance. These are language departments in private enterprises, so they're not language companies. Language companies are somewhere in the middle. Apparently, the students at this moment have really a bad time. And we will see that also in the challenges that they mentioned later on in the presentation. But overall, you can see that these figures are just average. We're looking at a scale of 0 to 10. So on average, we're at 5.5, 6 or something like that, which is not really very, very great. Although at the same time, most people express the willingness, or actually express rather a reluctance to leave the industry, which means that the language industry is kind of a sticky one. People tend to stick in this industry, not just in the industry, but even with their current employer. And that is obviously always a good sign for an industry, because it means that experience stays within the industry. Another element that we've been looking at, obviously, is the remote work. The clear conclusion here of those results is that we will most probably never return to pre-COVID situations. We are again here at a 5-point-something average, which means that the hybrid working model, is most probably going to be the new normal for how people are going to work in our industry. And this is obviously not looking at the independent professionals, which have always been working from home office, but this is about the employees in the language departments and in the language companies. Okay, this was the last slide about the generic, the global industry. So I would like now to pass the word to John O'Shea. For the independent language professionals.
Thank you very much, Rudy, for your general introduction to the results of the survey. So one thing that we do every year is we look at how the independent professionals are performing. And we also, one of the key things that we do every year as well, at least since 2017, has been to look at the gender makeup of the sector. I think it's a well-known fact that most people in our sector are female, but we have continuous statistical data confirming this. And we see that, especially in this year, we see as well that there is no real difference between the translation sector and the interpreting sector. It's pretty much the same, that the vast majority of people working in those sectors are female. What is very interesting, though, is how this data ties into the rest of the survey and the economic impacts of working as a freelance or an independent translator or interpreter in the sector impacts your earnings. We've started to see data around this, but I think it requires in future surveys more research, more detailed questions to explore, because we're seeing lots of what you might, I think Christos mentioned at the beginning of this introduction, like 1/3 of people are not earning enough. So we need to see if that 1/3 of people are female, male. So these are issues that require further exploration in future iterations of the survey. That's something very, very important that we want to look at. If you can move then to the next slide, Jeffrey. So again, in pretty much the same way that Rudy was describing, that the survey overall looks at expectations and reality, we do the same thing in the section of the survey for independent professionals. And what we see here is that there is one of the key concerns is about machine translation and the rise of technological disruption and things like this. But we also see some very, very interesting data. If you look at the left-hand side of the slide and the left-hand side of the image that's there, you see like a rise in expectations about activity globally, general activity, as Rudy said as well, even the independent professionals as a sector see that prices could potentially rise in 2022. This is very, very interesting. And I think this gives rise to certain learnings or certain tips that we could apply to independent professionals and their associations. That perhaps there's more work to be done in finding out about machine translation and artificial intelligence and how these sort of things impact on the profession. It's the sort of thing that associations could be providing more CPD on. The same sort of thing probably applies to pricing as well, that probably there should be more CPD on negotiations, price negotiations in particular. Another thing that we see as well, right throughout the survey, is that there are quite a lot of stress factors impacting on independent professionals. Rudy talked about this in his last slide, where he showed about the work-life balance. And one of the key stress factors there, again, is neural machine translation, the pace of technology, so on and so forth. So all these factors tie together and present like a pretty neatly wrapped up picture that this is an issue within the independent professional sector. If you could move on to the next slide, please, Rudy. So again, continuing on from that point, we see here, looking at the trends and the challenges that independent professionals believe exist in the sector in 2022, that AI, quality of machine translation improving, post-editing, so on and so forth. All these things continue to be major issues that people, independent professionals, are concerned about. And this is mirrored, as again, when we look at specifically at the stress factors, because we asked about the stress factors. And again, you see there machine translation, machine interpreting, pace of technological change, all these things are very, very important. And this ties in again as well with the issues about pay, economic climate, pay rates. So you see there's a link up between the two sides of the data here. But we also see that there are positive improvements happening. For example, in the relationship with project managers, people are starting to say more that the relationship with project managers, with LSCs, is neutral, or actually in other aspects of the survey that we see later on, that we're going to see in the later slide, is that relations with project managers are improving over time. Again, the expectations of pricing and how they are expected to rise is something that we're seeing all over the place in the survey. Another thing that's very important, I think, that's on this slide, or is it on a different slide? I think it's possibly in the next slide, is we expect more professionals to enter the sector. And again, this is something that associations can build on, providing perhaps more CPD on these issues, like how they can attract those professionals to actually join the associations. This slide, relation to client relationships, what we see here is a very much consistent picture with previous years. And this is, again, a very general comment that one could make about the responses that we see in the independent professional sector, that there is a great deal of consistency from year to year. This is in some way because we ask the same sort of questions every year, so we monitor the same issues, but it also, the fact that we get pretty much the same results from year to year is also helps with the reliability of the data, that we're seeing a well-established, consistent picture that in some ways is changing positively, in some ways is staying the same. And as Christos pointed out at the beginning, there are areas where we need to sit down and we need to hammer things out and discuss constructively how changes can be made in those areas. The one tip or piece of advice I would possibly give, looking at the data that appears on this slide, is that it appears that clients are quite open to the idea of receiving advice or consultancy from translators and interpreters about doing translation and interpreting better. So if you're an independent professional, I would say that it's very clear from the results of this survey that you should be talking more to your clients, explaining how things could be done better. The whole idea of client education, there's considerable scope for that. And it seems that from the results of the survey that clients are in fact open to that. And another very interesting observation from this slide as well, which again is very consistent from what we've been seeing in past years, is that a large number of independent professionals actually get a considerable part of their work just from direct clients. We have here on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, we can see the weighted average there is 45%. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Jeffrey? So again, as I intimated earlier, we do tend to look in the independent professional sector of the section of the survey about the relationships between independent professionals and language service companies, because it has in the past been considered like a major sticking point. And some of the interesting observations here are, one thing I already said earlier is that relations with project managers seem to be improving, but also we see problematic areas that still arise. For example, there's an increase in requests for rush deliveries or projects being shared. And so the learning that could be taken away from this is that possibly language service companies need to be doing more in client education themselves as well, trying to manage expectations better with their clients. Because if we look at the stress factors that independent professionals are exposed to, one of the major stress factors that they say that they have is time management, because they are exposed to these requests for rush jobs and so on and so forth. So the data from different aspects of the survey tends to link up and create a quite consistent picture. If we could move on then to the next slide as well. So one of the things that we also consistently examine every year in the survey is the question of continuing professional development. And it's something that a lot of clients expect from independent professionals, that they do keep up to date with their skills. And the lived reality of most translators and interpreters is that CPD is considered important, and they do engage quite frequently in CPD. What we saw during the pandemic was possibly a rise in the number of CPD courses or events being attended, which you might expect because of the drop in work or the need for people to reskill and so on and so forth. And we see that while people continue to do a lot of CPD, there's a drop in the higher frequencies of doing CPD. So more and more people are doing around 1 to 5 CPD events over the course of a year, and the number who are doing more than 10 is dropping. I think that's something to be expected. The sort of topics that people are doing CPD on, technology remains one of the top ones. Again, this ties in to the other data that we're seeing in this section of the survey about fears and concerns around neural machine translation, artificial intelligence, and all these developments in technology and the changes in technology which are taking place. And a very interesting observation as well is that the vast majority of people consider that the CPD that they do is actually a decent return on the investment. So again, some of the CPD will be free, some will not be free, but they seem to get quite a lot out of doing the CPD, which is very, very interesting. And then possibly some of the most interesting data in the independent professional section of the survey relates to finances, career, the ability to earn a decent enough living from being an independent professional translator or interpreter. And one thing that we see here is that we have around, again, as Christos pointed out, 1/3 of people not earning enough to be able to survive, to having to seek an extra income outside of translation and interpreting, and how this will tie into the expectations across the entire industry about rise in pay and in prices will be very interesting to monitor. And this is also a very interesting point in time because the European Commission itself is also relaxing in some way the rules on collective bargaining. So we might be able to see some developments taking place in that level as well to achieve better pay and rates for translators. one thing we also consistently look at every year is whether people are able to plan for their future financially. So we ask questions about whether they have private insurance that would cover the eventuality that they fall sick or they have an accident and are unable to work for a period of time, and also whether they're thinking in the really long term when they're going to retire. And what we see here is that the vast majority of people are not able to or not interested in taking out private insurance or are unaware of it. And I think this is something that individual professionals and also the associations of translators and interpreters should be focusing on a bit more, making translators and interpreters more aware of what private insurance exists, how it might be useful for them, all those sorts of things. Again, the same sort of thing applies for retirement provision for the future. Okay, we see an increase in the number of people who are making provision for retirement, but issues relating to financial planning, how you can provide for yourself if there's another downturn in the industry, in the sector, in the economy, are very, very important. So associations probably have a very important role to play here in making their members more aware of these sort of situations. And one thing that's very, very interesting as well, which ties into other things that we're seeing in the survey about precarity, instability in earnings and so on and so forth, is that the people who are not able to provide for their future retirement, the main reason for that is that they say that their earnings are too unstable. So again, something needs to be done to rectify this situation. If we could move on to the next slide, please. And then this is the last slide in this section, I think. So again, as in previous years, we look at technology because we've seen in past iterations of the survey that technology is a major concern and a major stress factor for independent professionals. So we want to have as much information about this as possible. We see very interestingly that translation memory technologies continue to be the most popular, in fact, increased in popularity in 2022 compared to 2021. We see as well that there's a rise in the number of independent professionals using machine translation compared to the previous year. And interestingly as well, we also see that independent professionals are very interested in investing in machine translation. So that it's the highest number there. You can see that in the right-hand side at the top. And interestingly as well, a lot of people consider that the training that they receive in relation to technology, which ties back to the issues of CPD that I referred to earlier, that they consider that the training is sufficient, but there is also room for improvement. So this is a message that we've mentioned in the past, that the providers of technology training could be doing better. So if I was to summarize the information in this sector, we are seeing that expectations are more buoyant than in previous years, that people are expecting a price rise or to be able to negotiate better pay and rates. But we're also seeing that many individual independent professionals are struggling financially, at least 1/3. That's quite a very large percentage to be struggling. That key concerns and fears and stresses tend to congregate around the idea of technology and disruption in work, and that CPD continues to be very important. And I think that CPD can usefully be refocused onto these issues of technology disruption to assuage people's fears, to make them more aware of the benefits of using technology for themselves and possibly the potential for earning more money in that way. Also on practical issues of financial planning and negotiation skills in relation to pay in particular. Thank you very, very much for your attention, and handing back now to Rudy.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Can you go to the next slide, Jeffrey? Okay, about language service companies, I've already mentioned quite a few things about them in the general part of the presentation. A few additional ones, with all those positive expectations in activity, investments, profitability, and so on. We would tend to forget that there is one negative one that correlates with those, and that's the recruitment effort. As you can see on the right-hand side, there is definitely an expectation that the recruitment effort will continue to increase. It already increased in 2021, and 2022 is expected to be at least at the same level. This is also something that we see in the trends and the challenges or the replies to those, not just of the language companies, but also of the other segments. Now, a few other details about the results. This year is the first year actually that we see that the majority of the participating companies have a revenue of more than 1 million euro, and that's kind of a symbolic threshold, I would say, because as you can see in the graph at the bottom, most language companies are indeed growth oriented. Although the vast majority of them are not growth oriented to sell their company. They want to grow and remain independent. That is very important to keep in mind. I mentioned briefly that the rebound in 2021 was valid for the whole industry almost. But what is very interesting to see is that it is contrary to the dip that we saw in 2020 with COVID, where specific parts of the industry were very hit very hard. This rebound actually benefits everybody across the industry. So we don't see much difference in, for instance, specialties or types of activity that people are specialized in. One could have expected that, okay, we now that interpreting is back in business, we would see a huge rebound there. No, we see rebound, yes, but not more than in translation. We see a rebound in tourism, which was hit extremely hard with COVID, but not more than with engineering or with legal and so on. So that is quite interesting to see. Another finding that interesting finding is that certification does not seem to have any impact on performance, at least not last year. Again, this may be the result simply of a generic growth of the market, so that everybody benefits from it, but we didn't see any proof that certified companies would have better performance than non-certified companies, for instance. And the certification itself, the level of certification didn't change much, which is normal because we are already at a very high level. So that is perfectly normal. Yes, to the next slide, please. The trends and the challenges. If we first look at the challenges, price pressure is again the number one there. This is traditional. And in this case, it's a little bit strange because there seems to be an expectation that prices are going to increase, but at the same time, price pressure remains the main challenge. At the same time, on the other end of the spectrum, we see that finance management is the the least challenging, or seems to be perceived as the least challenging one, which means that language companies at least consider themselves financially sound at this moment, which obviously is a good thing, because it means that there is a little risk that even a temporary disruption might cause serious impacts. Now, I mentioned the negative part of the recruitment effort, and we see that again here in the challenges. Talent recruitment is the third, strongest challenge, identified as the third strongest challenge, which is something that we need really to monitor very closely. And we see it also in the trends. That is clearly the biggest threat. The opportunities are all in the technology, I would say, all in the technology enabled area, whether it's automation or quality improvement, the emerging applications like post-editing, voice and audio, all those things are technology enabled activities. That is where the language companies currently see the most opportunity. Although we do have some doubts about some of those. And if you can go to the next slide, please. Especially if we look at these growth curves, growth intention curves, I should say. If you see at the left side the services, you see that translation post-editing is the one with the biggest growth potential, where people believe it is the biggest growth potential, with 64% of participants saying that. But the standard human translation is still a solid second. That is today still by far the biggest activity. And then we see creative translation. That seems to be indicating that there is quite a significant part of the industry, of the language companies, that want to distinguish themselves and that do not want to put all their eggs in the same MT-enabled basket. Let's say it like that. Now, the next one, voice and multimedia, we saw that is also something that is identified as an opportunity. Now, and that seems to be confirmed here by the 37% of people who've selected this as a growth area for their company. This is absolutely not confirmed in the recruitment plans that they are reporting. Hardly anybody is planning to hire voice talent. Or people with that kind of experience. So it seems a little bit unrealistic to expect that you would grow in voice and multimedia if you don't have concrete plans to hire people in that area. And we see the same thing in the emerging applications, which we just saw in the previous slide. Yes, people see this as an opportunity area, but at the same time, we don't really see the recruitment efforts or the recruitment intentions to attract profiles of that type, like computational linguists, which Christos mentioned as well. So these plans, these are intentions, but at the same time, companies need to realize that these plans can only be executed if they also hire the right people and acquire the right knowledge. When we're looking at the domains on the right-hand side, our main conclusion here, with the exception of the entertainment sector, where you see that the growth area, the curve is really pointing upward. with 44%, while entertainment is only at about 6% currently of the business. All the other ones are, the growth intentions are nicely following the current volume, which is a sign that people are expecting to grow with the existing. It's more of the same. Now, in a growth, in a period of growth, that is not risky, but it is risky if you think about potential disruptive events like COVID, which can attack a specific domain. This is, for me, it's a little bit of a sign that people have lost a little bit the sense of urgency which COVID had created, and that people are expecting to sit back a little bit and let business grow naturally without changing things too much. I hope I'm wrong here, but this chart seems to indicate that way. Another risk factor, in my opinion, is the origin of business. We have not seen over the years, we have not seen an increase in export activity outside Europe. Quite the contrary. At the start of ELIS, there was more export outside Europe than today, with only 12%, at least based on the responses that we received. So this creates a certain vulnerability, obviously, and is something to be taken into account. Yes, we go to the next slide. The technology. Let's focus on two specific technologies. On the one hand, NMT, and on the other one, the other RSI, remote simultaneous interpreting. It's not surprising that about 60% of the language companies respond that they have implemented MT. What is surprising, on the other hand, is that they report that only about 22% of their projects are handled with MT. If we do a calculation based on the size of the company, we find about 30%, 31% of project value, which is still far below what some other sources of information tell us. And also, which is much less than what academia thinks, for instance, that the reality is. Now, one could say, okay, this is because most people answering ELIS questions are small to medium-sized companies, and the real large ones are much more active in NMT and post-editing. That may be the case, but at the same time, other research points out that those really large companies represent only about 15% of the total market. That means that their impact on NMT use is going to be modest if we look at the market as a whole. And another reason why we think that these 22% or 31% is not unrealistic is that we are getting exactly the same type of percentages from the language departments and from the independent professionals. So it looks like this is closer to reality than what we are seeing from other sources. Now, we will continue to monitor this, obviously, but it was a surprising result. The other one, RSI, that's really the champion technology of this era, I would say, because in only 18 months, RSI has filled almost completely the niche, the natural niche it has in the language company segment. 18 months ago, before COVID, there were only very few pioneer companies who were using RSI. And today, almost everybody is using it. Almost everybody who needs it. We see that RSI is used by 40% of the participants, which is far more than the part of interpreting in the total business of the language companies. And there's only about 15 additional percent that are considering to implement it in the future, either this year or in the future, which means that there's, just like with certification, RSI has filled the natural niche. That doesn't mean that RSI has not other niches to fill, but at least here for in the language companies, this seems to be the case. Yes, next slide, Jeffrey. So we're going to the language departments now. You can move to the next one. Here we already indicated that language department and the buyers, we group those always together because language departments and buyers are often the same. They share the same expectations as the language companies and the independent professionals, but we do see some different focuses. Especially one thing that is clearly also important for them is the data security requirements. Those were already high. They continue to be high. And that is something that that also the providers, both the companies and the individuals, need to be aware of. But when we're looking at the main concerns of the language department, it has nothing to do with the activity or the pricing or the data security. It's all about the work volume that they need to handle themselves, especially in combination with the budgets that are available to do it, and even more important, the staff size, their own internal staff size, the number of people who are available to do the work. And we will see that again in the trends and the challenges. Yes, to the next slide. As you can see in the challenges, workload, nightmare for 14%, and in any case, a challenge for up to 87%, more or less. So definitely that's the main concern for the language departments. On the other end of the spectrum, we see that most people seem to be convinced that they do have the quality more or less under control. It still is identified as a challenge, primarily as a minor challenge. But we will see that also in the technology, where we find that quality control in this segment. So that seems to be under control. Same for technology, for the technology itself, and we will also see that technology-wise, the language departments are quite well advanced. So that's a good thing to know, because those are the clients of the providers, obviously. When we look at the trends, again, just like for the language companies, technology-enabled trends are the ones that they see as opportunities. Light post editing is also seen as a clear opportunity, although this activity obviously is quite controversial. The activity is not well well defined yet, and there's a lot of anxiety about it, but definitely it is seen as an opportunity. The competition for talent, the recruitment area here as well is seen as the main threat by the language departments. So that's a constant. For logical reasons, it is not visible in the independent professionals because they are not really hiring, but all the other ones are seeing that as a threat. Yes, next slide. We've been looking particularly at outsourcing practices among the language departments, because last year one of the remarks or one of the conclusions was that the language department and the buyers tended to be reluctant to outsource other activities than the traditional ones, or the execution activities like translation, interpreting, subtitling, those things. Although the list is very long, as you can see, this is more or less the list that a typical language service company would advertise. Of things that they can do. The situation doesn't seem to have changed. We still see that even things like terminology management, for instance, or SEO, search engine optimization, or the globalization consulting that also John was mentioning, are not seen as an area that they want to outsource. These are things that they want to keep internal in their own team. Now, one exception in that is the machine translation training, where there is clearly a wish to outsource, and where part is already outsourced. That is probably because this is a very specific type of activity, which is in many cases also not outsourced to language companies, but rather to specialized companies. But what I want to, what our conclusion here needs to be is that there was no real change compared to last year. And what I mentioned already before is that public administrations tend to outsource less than the private enterprises. Now, in the outsourcing practice question, there was not that much of clear trends there or tendencies. The only thing that we could identify is maybe a tendency to increase control. So we see that the language departments express a wish to outsource more to single language vendors compared to multi-language vendors, which increases control, or to outsource more to freelance resources, the independent professionals, rather than to agencies, which also increase control. Now, this is often these things are cyclic in nature, but we will need to monitor that in the coming years to see if that continues. Yes, next. Working in the language department, we've been looking, and again, I've already said it a few times, you will find more information in the report, which is quite long, about all matters about working in the industry, and in this case in the language department. On the right hand side, you see the differences between the scores about career satisfaction, the different aspects of it, the work-life balance, the salary levels, training opportunities between the different types of organization. As I said before, we do see considerable differences, not only in these career satisfaction scores, but also the skill gaps, needs for skill improvements of new recruitees. And we see those differences between the different organization types between language companies, language departments in enterprises, in public administrations. There's even differences between the international and the national or local administrations. We do not see the difference between the size of the organizations, as I said before, but definitely between those different types of organizations, which hints at differences in structure, in the way of working, the activities even that they are doing, but also in the way of recruitment, how new employees are selected. As you can see, translation technology in the need for skill improvement is definitely the main concern for language companies when they are hiring new people, and not for the other ones, for the other types of organizations, while other skills are more considered more to be lacking by the other for the other organization types than for the language companies. Feel free to look at this chart in detail in the report, and but there's no real clear conclusions at this moment about this. Yes. And now I'll give the floor to Alexandra, who will talk about the training institutes.
Thank you, Rudy. Okay. I don't see my image until now, but I suppose I'm online. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alexandra Krause. I'm from the University of Vienna, and I'm representing DMT and at the same time academia in general. One short note of introduction to the whole survey. For the 2022 survey, it was the first time we did not only invite teachers and researchers to participate in the survey, but also students, which obviously raised the respondent numbers, but at the same time it was a bit, let's say, shifting a bit the results. So we see here in the first slide, we see again the system, it's always the same system, saying reality versus expectations. We see that academia is sharing the optimism of language industry concerning the development. Obviously, we have different concerns compared to language industry. Our concerns are more regarding the declining number of students and budget. And at the same time, we have much more administrative constraints, which although are hindering other activities, obviously. Jeffrey, can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. We see that trends and challenges, it's again the structures, trends and challenges. Academia considers the visibility of the profession one of the major issues, and closely to this is related the students' concern for their professional future. And from my personal point of view, there's therefore a great need for action in this area. We see also that the time factor, as in many other professions, seems to be a problem for both academics and students. But this is especially important when it comes to balance work and studies from the student's perspective, because a lot of students are working at the same time to earn their lives, and that makes it harder to them. There is an interesting discrepancy in the area of technology, because academics, teachers and researchers tend to perceive it as a challenge compared to students, whatever this could mean. And on the other hand, as far as trends are concerned, these are seen as opportunities rather than threats in certain terms, although this applies to a lesser extent to artificial intelligence in language technology. But as I said before, in assessing these trends, it is important to note that it was probably students who, for some topics, gave the relatively high number of don't know or no trend answers. So we have to really consider this not maybe as a general trend for academia. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. The gaps. So the results show that only a few training institutes cover all or most specialization and at all levels up to the PhD. And I think this is very important for several reasons, for research and for training, that you try hard to cover all levels. Some specializations are less covered, namely authoring and technical writing, creative writing and PSIT. The same is true for interpreting, but this was to be expected because our research was focused more on translation in this case, while within the MT, while all other subdisciplines are relatively well represented and distributed. What we also see, and this is something very important to me, is that a relatively high proportion of optional specialization contrasts with a relatively low degree of separate and major specializations. And obviously, if separate and major are added together, we have a relatively balanced ratio to optional. But nevertheless, many specializations seem to be integrated, and this is the highest percentage. So this should lead to me to a discussion in academia about the extent to which genuine specialization in the study programs makes sense in terms of employability. And all the more so if one takes into account that 129 respondents answered the question how they rate the expected language industry evolution in 2022 in terms of specialization, with increase, and 33 even with strong increase, though there is a discrepancy between the teaching or training reality and the expectations. And similar reflections may apply to the language picture. Even if the language picture is not necessarily a 100% meaningful, because on the one hand, some countries are underrepresented, and on the other, countries with less than 5 answers, 5 respondents, may further distort the picture, it becomes quite clear that niche languages and languages of lesser diffusion need definitely to be promoted. So if the distribution of languages taught is brought into line with the needs of the language industry, and you remember Rudy said that the competition for talents is, although a factor affecting the industry, then graduates who have niche languages in the language portfolio and can demonstrate a domain specialization have very good chances of employability. And I think this is a fact we agree all about. And for the last slide, as Rudy said before, we see the relatively high degree of implementation of technology, which is a good factor. And training costs and ownership still remain the main issues for academics. And you remember that Rudy said that there was a discrepancy between the perception of academics and LSE independent professionals and language departments of the use of EMT. And this could be an interesting issue worth discussing. That's from the academic point of view. Whenever you need or want to discuss something more in detail, you're more than welcome. I'm at your disposal to discuss the results with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alexandra. Some conclusions. If I want to summarize the findings of this ELIS 2022, I would say that 2021 gave the language industry breathing space, and actually it boosted the expectations for a longer-term growth and development. But we shouldn't forget that, as I said in the beginning, the results came in before the Ukraine crisis erupted. So we need to monitor that very closely. There are some reasons for concern, as I already mentioned a few times. This loss of sense of urgency is a potential one, because that sense of urgency during the COVID crisis really accelerated technology and process innovation, and we probably should not lose that. We've seen that the independent professionals continue to struggle with earnings, and on the other hand, even some of the stress factors that needs more attention. And definitely the recruitment effort is something that should concern all stakeholders in the industry, because talent management is going to become a real key element in all companies and language departments' success, because it seems unlikely that the numbers of new graduates are going to be able to meet the increased demands for new talent. Especially if we also look at the skills gaps that need to be closed. But in terms of despite of these issues, we see that the industry is a sticky one. It is the language industry is a good place to work, or people like to work in it, and it has a strong employment potential. Although, and here's one thing that I've not mentioned before, it's not very clear how big the employment potential is. In 2019, Eurostat published the number of 180,000 translators and interpreters being active in the EU. But it's not very clear whether these are only independent professionals or whether they also counted the staff of language companies in there. This year with ELIS, we did a very cautious made a very cautious start, asking the participants how many companies they thought there were in their country. Based on that result, we have a very coarse number at this moment of something like 70,000 to about 200,000 employees in that segment of the industry. That's obviously a very, very big error margin, which we want to make more precise. But this is definitely a sizable industry and worth developing more. And I'm very glad to work with all the other partners on this, on these data, and to continue this in the future. So this is the end of the presentation of the ELIS results. On this slide, you see the websites of the participating survey partners, where you can find more information, and definitely go back to the ELIS survey webpage, download the presentation, download the report, read it completely, and if you have comments and suggestions for improvements, let me know at research@elissurvey.org. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Rudy, Alex, and John, for a whiz through a very complex report. As Rudy says, we do have the full report and this slide deck with all the notes shown on the slide deck. They're all there to be available, and they're available on the ELIS website, elis-survey.org. You just need to go to the repository area, sign up and register, and once you've done that, you can download not only this report, but previous reports and recordings from ELIS over the last decade. Thank you so much. Watch this space, because ELIS will be revisiting a few of the points that have been touched on this afternoon to see what the impact of the Ukrainian war has had on the industry, among other things. So we urge you to participate, and this will give us more up-to-date data. But for now, I thank everyone who has presented, and thank you for watching this broadcast.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Thank you.
You.